This Voice of San Diego podcast is sponsored by Manolatus Nelson Murphy, Advertising and Public Relations. M&M brings decades of experience and their vast network to you. The firm develops insightful strategies and cost-effective tactics to help clients achieve their goals and connect to those who matter most. M&M specializes in media relations, community engagement, crisis communications, and cross-platform marketing. Learn more at mnmadpr.com.
Thanks for joining us on the Voice of San Diego podcast in partnership with News Radio 600 Kogo. I am Scott Lewis, the CEO and editor-in-chief at Voice, joined as always by the transportation maven himself, Andrew Keats. Hello.
Hello.
And Sarah Libby, our managing editor, taco savant.
Hello.
How are you?
Great.
Okay, we have a great show today coming up. Nobody knows where the 50th Congressional District is. It's more of an idea, maybe, than a
Concept.
district. Especially the people who are running to represent it. And we just released a story today. Today is Thursday, from our former intern, Katie Stiegel, about a professor at Southwestern College and how the school's officials kept quiet about misconduct and some of the crazy things they found on his computer. And Andy has an interview with San Marcos Mayor Rebecca Jones following a big vote at SANDAG last Friday. We're going to try to break that down. But first, we have two updates from previous shows' discussions. Last week, of course, we had the District Attorney Summer Stephan. She came in, and I have never seen law enforcement leaders in San Diego break ranks like she did when she came in. And we talked about rape kits and especially Andy's story about how the police department, San Diego Police Department's crime lab, had cut some corners and processed dozens of rape kits faster and in a different way than a bunch of others had been processed. She came in and said that wasn't something she knew about, but she emailed with a clarification. She said, after listening to the podcast, I just wanted to clarify one detail. As I believe you know, and VOSD's reporting has shown, SDPD did notify the working group they were changing their approach to testing in certain categories. While our representative on the working group was informed, SDPD took the action unilaterally, and we as an office did not approve. At the time, I was not informed of the change. I'm very glad that SDPD has now committed to testing all of their kits, and consider that a credit to Chief Nislight moving forward to do the right thing. Now, this is a pretty significant update.
Yeah, it's a pretty significant change. It goes from we weren't aware of it, which is something she said plainly and clearly on the podcast, and now she's saying that a ranking member of her staff who runs sex crimes and is on the working group was aware of it, but that they didn't sign off on it is the part that she's maintained. They didn't approve it, and that she, at the time, didn't know of the change. But that is considerably different than the claim that SDPD simply did not tell them at all.
Right. So I understand you're going to do some follow-up on that. We'll see what SDPD says about that walk back. Like you said, like she can still be against it or be upset that it happened, but not necessarily now maintain that she had no way to have known about it, right?
Right.
Okay, and Georgette Gomez, we've talked a lot about her. She's the city council president for San Diego. She's running now for Congress. We've talked a lot about all the things that she is giving up to do that. But I saw her the other night at a little soiree.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
A little soiree.
You're a soiree guy.
And she said she just wanted to make clear, she made this point. She said, hey, Scott, want to make clear, I am not going to give up the council presidency in 2020.
Yeah, when you came in and told me about this conversation, I didn't quite remember that we had talked about it on the show. But yeah. I had asked you if you thought that, and I think, what did you say, that the political world is cruel to a lame duck?
Yes. And I just assumed you're running for Congress, you're going to be distracted. Council president's a big job. You know, I mean, that's what the mayor basically used to be in the city of San Diego. And you set the agenda, you decide a lot of things. So she says she's got it. She's going to stick with it. You know, the whole council, or 5 members of the city council are turning over in 2020, at the beginning of 2021, right? And there'll be a new mayor, and she says she's got another year to guide the ship.
Okay.
See how that goes. All she has to do is convince 4 other council members to stick with her.
Yep. Remind me, at this time last week, had she given up her MTS chairmanship yet?
No.
Okay. Well, she has now.
Oh, so she did give up that.
Yes.
Did she name a successor or chosen or preferred?
No.
Okay, interesting. All right. Former Congressman Darrell Issa and former City Councilman Carl DeMaio are both running for Congress in the 50th District in East County. Last week, Issa really pulled a great launch. Like, he got all these potential rivals to line up behind him.
Yeah.
Some of whom were, potential rivals.
It's a power move.
People who had flirted with running for the seat.
Or said that they were running, and then suddenly show up to endorse him. It couldn't have gone better, it seems. He was out in front of El Cajon City Hall, and he said this.
And so today I'm announcing that I will be the next congressman from the 50th Congressional District. I'm dedicated to do that because I believe that I have the history, the skills, the seniority, and the capability to hit the ground running, not just for this district, but for California to help.
Okay, so DeMaio showed up there to heckle it, to kind of have a competing presser, make sure the police or the press saw him over there as, hey, Issa gave up on his last district. I'm here.
Yeah, going with like a Trumpian nickname like Issa the Quitter.
Right.
Yes.
So the dueling pressers there. Replay that part where he says where he's at.
Not just for this district, but for California.
So this district, there's one problem. He was not in the 50th district at the time. The El Cajon City Hall is actually in the 53rd district, the one that Georgette Gomez is running for, which is an illustration of nobody knows where the district is.
Yeah. Well, also, it is not the 50th district. It is also not the 49th district that Darrell Issa used to represent. It's but a 3rd district.
Yeah. And it also illustrates that, like, these districts are all over the place. Georgette Gomez's hoped for district stretches to El Cajon City Hall, down to Otay Ranch. So neither DeMaio nor Issa were actually in the district they're running for, which is, a thing considering that they've both been criticized for not living in the district.
And having run for or previously represented other districts.
Right.
Which I love this race. It's so good.
It's
got quite a lot going on.
I like there's like a hit the ground running, not just for this district, which you astutely pointed out isn't, but it's almost like he acknowledges it. Like, but hey, let's be serious. I'm doing this for all of California. It doesn't matter where I am.
Yeah, we have that part too. They're all trying to help Republicans compete in California. This is a stand they're taking.
Sure.
So there are several candidates now running in that seat. Duncan Hunter, of course, the incumbent, Amar Campa-Najjar, Carl DeMaio, Darrell Issa, Brian Jones. He's the one he sent out an email saying, I'm happy to give these guys a tour of the district. That's a pretty good troll.
Yeah, that was great.
It was a great troll, actually, because it followed up with like places he would take them to that were, at least to me, genuinely obscure.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's okay.
And also, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know either of them personally, but places that it seemed like Carl DeMaio and Darrell Issa might not have ever been or want to go.
What were they?
It's like a shooting range and take them on a Jeep tour and
that's
whatnot.
Good. Sounds very East County. All right. There was a poll 10 News did. It showed DeMaio doing really well along with Amar Campa-Najjar. I think both of them would like that matchup. Or I guess Amar would probably prefer to run against the indicted incumbent, maybe, yes. I guess.
He's done it before.
I think you've put your finger on something there, that his ideal candidate be the one who might face jail time before Election Day.
Yeah. So, and then DeMaio announced another big fundraising haul, like $1.3 million.
Yeah, huge.
Which Amar had I think, raised like $500,000, which seemed good at the time. And then DeMaio nearly tripled it.
Right. Conventional wisdom, of course, is in these congressional races, you need a lot of money to do TV, right? That's the key. So, yeah, I guess we're watching this race. I guess that's something we're doing.
Seems like it.
Hopefully they can find their bearings.
If I had told you 10 years ago that like the most watched congressional race in San Diego County would be like a bloodbath race in the 50th, you wouldn't have believed that, right? Because it seemed like Duncan Hunter, once he was elected, it was like, well, I guess he'll have that job for 50 years.
Yeah, I guess I would have assumed that. But if you could have qualified it with like there will be an open seat of some kind. But it's not even an open seat. He's still there, I guess.
Yeah.
So weird. We asked Barry Jantz, a political consultant or, pundit of some type in the East County, and what, would matter about this if they lived in the district. He said, look, it only matters if somebody like Brian Jones can actually, make a point of it in commercials with money. So we'll see if he gets the money to do that. All right. Katie Stiegel, intern we're pretty proud of. She's great mind, great investigative mind, it seems like. Did quite a story, huh?
Yes. So this is something she's actually been chasing for 2 years. She's a student at Southwestern College. She got her hands on this investigation by a private investigator hired by the college about a professor. And initially, a student filed a Title IX complaint. She said she'd had a sexual affair with this professor, and looking back on it, she felt like there was some coercion involved that wasn't appropriate. So as they go to look into this professor, they find something that surprised them. And that is a trove on his office computer that included nude photos of himself, nude photos of several other students, video of him having sex with a student in his office, photos of him masturbating, just some really intense stuff.
Stuff you might not want to keep on your work computer.
Yeah, especially if it shows acts that you committed in your office.
Yeah. Now, she tried to get the documents related to this case long ago. Didn't work out.
Yes. Apparently, they told her it was not in the public interest, that this public school teacher had done these things on public property.
So we put our team on it, the indomitable Felix Tinkoff.
Right.
Went after it, got it, and there was another important piece of information here, which is that he left, but...
Yes. So, yeah, this is something that we had to chase down as well. And he's no longer a professor there, thanks to this agreement that they struck, that he would resign. And on the college's end, they agreed that if any prospective employers came, asking about him, they would give him a neutral reference. And the agreement didn't mention any of this conduct, didn't mention any type of investigation. And so they essentially just said, yeah, we're happy to tell them when you worked here and what your salary was.
Wow. All right. So that story is on voiceofsandiego.org right now. You can check that out. Katie Stiegel, she's got a investigative nose.
Yes.
She knows what
she's doing. A force. Look out.
All right. So, yeah, Southwestern, by the way, college, the journalism program is always churning out some talented people. I spoke there a few times. I've watched it for years. Kudos to them for putting together a great team and obviously a news sense program that we can all be proud of.
Yeah.
All right. So Andy, you were going to speak today with San Marcos Mayor Rebecca Jones. Why did you want to do that?
So Mayor Jones was one of the more vocal representatives from the northern part of the county who has taken exception to some of the new direction at SANDAG under Director Hassan Akrada, specifically that had come to a head around this proposal that Akrada had made, which was he wanted to spend $600 million of a mix of Transnet money, state money, and federal money on a set of projects that he had intended to jumpstart his 5 big moves. 5 big moves is the not very catchy name that they've given to their next regional transportation plan, which is a 50-year document outlining all the big transportation capital investments we're going to make in the county.
That document is not done yet.
It is not even written. But so I want, how do I say this? So last week there was the vote on the $600 million of spending, which is not the same thing. It is not the same thing. It is often conflated with, but it has no direct connection to the 5 Big Moves plan, which is an idea that has yet to be put on paper.
This is just $600 million. There's some question about what they should direct it to.
Yeah.
They wanted to resolve what to do with that $600 million they have left from the last extension of
this isn't the end of that money. This is just $600 million.
Okay.
And yeah.
Just your normal $600 million.
Spent over a 5-year period.
Okay, got it.
But that's different than the 5 Big Moves.
It is not the 5 Big Moves. These things are frequently and maddeningly, in my mind, conflated, and they are not the same.
Be a great business plan name for Big 5.
Not the 5. Oh, yes. Right.
Just throwing that out
there. The sporting goods store? Yeah.
Exactly.
So now the Mayor Jones and some of her allies, which include Supervisor Jim Desmond, Supervisor Kristen Gaspar, the Escondido mayor, Paul McNamara, who is a Democrat, they together disliked the proposal that the SANDAG director had put forward, and they had an alternate proposal of their own, and that won.
For the $600 million.
For how to spend the $600 million. We get into that discussion. I get into what happened there with Mayor Jones. But I want to, before we start, kind of lay out some ideas to understand when you go into that interview.
Sure.
Because I was a little bit perplexed when I saw the discussion about this as either a major deal that had assured the future of something in the county.
Yeah, basically we've been watching this debate about transit versus highways.
Yes.
And after this vote last week, it was
also rural and North County areas versus urban and South County.
And we were
areas.
watching this bubble up for months and months and months. And after last week's meeting, there was several reports that guess what? The rural North County roads guys won.
Yeah.
And the transit nerds lost.
Yes, and the rural North County, not all rural, but the rural and North County contingent, in their talking points had repeatedly said that this is a balanced plan in juxtaposition of the SANDAG proposal, which was not a balanced plan, and that transit doesn't work for everyone, and that this kept promises to taxpayers that had been made on transit, again, in juxtaposition with the other one. And I should say, likewise, the losing end, the people who didn't like this proposal, had constantly said, we need to embrace the future and recognize the reality of climate change. And this, suggesting that this amendment didn't do that. And I thought that all of these narratives that were competing as justifications for this vote did not make a great deal of sense if you looked at the details of what was being voted on last Friday.
Which were?
So, a regional transportation plan, this 50-year document with lots of different projects. The last one outlines $200 billion in projects. That's the size and scope that we're talking about, $200 billion. This 5 Big Moves one, which is the name for the next one, we don't know what that number will come in at, but for a point of comparison, let's say it's $200 billion. Transnet, the tax approved that was part of the implementation of that set of projects in that $200 billion, that is expected to account for a total of $10 billion. Okay?
Okay.
And last week's vote was over spending $600 million. Okay?
Okay.
But the amendment that was proposed by the North County and rural area, Steve Voss was the signatory of, changed of that $600 million, just $60 million. Okay?
Okay.
So in other words, the major victory that represented a complete shift in what we were doing, or from the other side of the perspective, the one that represented that we were ignoring the reality of climate change, represented 0.03% of spending in the RTP, or 0.6% 8% of spending Transnet figures. Okay? So now the $600 million was, I should also add, it's all or almost entirely planning money. None of the projects that are being debated in there with that $60 million really have now been funded. It's just the money given to them so you can do the environmental engineering and planning work so that you can hope to get the money to actually build them in the future. Okay? So the victory for people in the East County and rural areas who will now no longer deal with congestion, they can look forward to $0 for new construction projects at this point today. That is how much new construction money has been allocated based on the victory last week. $0.
Got it.
Okay? It's new money for planning and engineering. Okay? Which is not to say that that's unimportant. That's how this agency works. You need to spend money on planning and engineering to get projects in a position so that you can build them in the future. That's important. But we should also be clear that the highway projects that they have championed here are still unfunded.
Got it.
Okay? So what did they do? They took $60 million away from a project that would turn HOV lanes on I-5 North into express lanes. That was $60 million that actually was for construction of that project. They have taken it away, and they have reallocated it to studying and planning for expansion of the 78 between I-5 and I-15, if they can ever get the money for it, for connectors onto the 78, and for studying an expansion of the 67 in East County. $60 million.
I have a hard time wrapping my mind around this because it sounds like what you're saying is that some politicians were being disingenuous about the scale of their achievements, and that can't be true.
And likewise, that other politicians were being, I think,
alarmist,
a bit alarmist about what they were losing.
Wow.
Well, if you want to really dive into that, here's that discussion with San Marcos Mayor Rebecca Jones. Thanks, guys.
There was a big vote at SANDAG last week. We'll get into some of the details of that deal. But I think let's start from this perspective, which is I think it was sort of a culmination of a few months of uncharacteristic, open debate at SANDAG's board. And I say uncharacteristic, just in previous years, disputes, if there were some, they seemed to be handled behind the scenes. They were not usually quite so openly hostile, honestly. And I think you had some comments on Friday that basically said you wanted to get the board to get back to working together. So let's start from this point. What did you, from your perspective, what happened Friday? What was decided upon, and what is the significance of it?
Well, I think on Friday, what really happened is we had some different voices at the table. Mm-hmm. We came to an agreement that was not necessarily what the director wanted, which he does not set the policy that's set by the board. And then you also had, the voters of San Diego County having their vote respected as well. Mm-hmm. And I think it was a really important decision to decide. Are we going to listen to the voters that voted in 2004 and really bring forward a balanced approach? And, mind you, these are not projects that are 100% built. Mm-hmm. These are going to be the environmentals, which is a very important first step in the process of actually building these HOV lanes. And these are not, except for the 67, they're not general purpose lanes. They are HOV lanes that we're talking about, which are really important as part of the network because it gives you options. And as we move forward with technology, I happen to drive an electric car. As we move forward with the technology, we have to have the HOV lanes because that's where we're going to have the autonomous vehicles driving and, providing that dynamic charging if it ends up happening at some point in time, the dynamic charging as in the cars,
sure,
not paying to drive on those roads. But, I think it's really important that really we provide an avenue for us to get where technology is going in the future.
All right. So you touched on a few things in there that I wanted to come back to. Let's maybe take a step back here and discuss exactly what was voted on Friday. So here, well, let me take a crack at it. You can correct it as need be. So, SANDAG Director Asana Krata came forward and said, we have roughly $600 million of money that's a combination of local tax revenue from Transnet, state and federal money, and we want to put it to a list of a bunch of different projects, almost all of it, not all of it, but close to all of it, on planning and engineering, which is may sound minor, but this is the way organizations like this fund projects. You move things along steadily. If you get $1 million here, $1 million there, do some structural engineering work, you do some environmental planning work, and you look up 15 years later and it's all accumulated and you've got a freeway. And so this was mostly planning work, and he said that he framed it as an opportunity to sort of jumpstart his big vision for a remade transit system. And so some of the planning work that was proposed in here was for his various transit projects, the details of which have not really been all that fleshed out yet, but maybe that's what this planning process would be. And so of that $600 million, there was an alternative proposal put forward by Mayor Steve Voss from Poway, who's the chair of SANDAG, and Paul McNamara, mayor of Escondido, Republican and a Democrat, that would reallocate some of that money. That was that amendment was the thing that was actually passed. And basically it came down to moving around $60 million. It was a cancellation of a conversion from HOV lanes to express lanes on I-5 in the north part of the county, to make that project much like the I-15 express lanes, where you can pay different amounts at different times of the day. Buses can go there. People who have time sensitivity to their commute can essentially pay a fee to use this lane that's going to be at usually free run, basically. Free run, I mean, you won't be sitting in traffic. And that $60 million was reallocated to a few projects. One was to do the environmental and design work to turn SR 67 out in East County into a 4-lane highway. And that was specifically called out as a need due to fire evacuation. And then to do environmental planning on 2 sections of the 78, a connector between the 78 and I-5. This is a North County project. And then environmental work to potentially plan to do HOV lanes connecting I-5 to I-15 on the 78. That is the entirety of the dispute, right?
Yes.
Those $60 million, whether you want to spend those $60 million on an I-5 freeway change, or if you want to spend those $60 million on the 67 and these 2 projects on the 78. Everybody else agrees with everything. So it's about a 10% disagreement of the $600 million spending, which is part of a $200 million regional plan, right? So we're talking about a fraction of a fraction of a fraction, right?
Yes.
All to spend for planning work for projects that will need many, many, many more millions of dollars from an unknown source in the future to ever be built.
Yes, that's correct. However,
Okay.
if you now I just let me interrupt you for
Sure.
a minute. So on the 67, that is so imperative, because if you've never actually driven on the 67, you don't know how bad it is. I grew up in East County, so I grew up in Ramona and El Cajon, and the first time I ever drove on a freeway was from Ramona to El Cajon on the 67.
So a formative moment.
Yeah.
I remember it.
Well, my poor mother, she was really white knuckling it as I was driving. I was sweating profusely because it's scary, and it hasn't changed significantly. It still is very dangerous. And when you're talking about a situation where we will have wildfires, there's no way that we won't, and it's very difficult to stop a wildfire. It's all about diverting it away from structures and, so you don't have loss of human life. To to not be able to evacuate people in a safe manner is not okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's not okay with any of us, I believe. And so that had to happen. That 4 lanes, it's not an addition of lanes because we wanted the lanes. It's because it's necessary. It's imperative for the loss of human life and safety. And then if you're talking about
I'll just add, though.
Yeah, definitely.
This vote didn't ensure that those 4 lanes will be built.
What it did is the environmental has to be done. And so if you don't have the environmental done, you don't have any options of any funds coming in. And so, for instance, we also, on the 52, we advanced monies so that those monies could be leveraged through federal dollars.
So the original plan had it spread out over 5 years, and you moved it up into the first 2, basically, right?
And that was to help the 52 coalition secure those funds for federal dollars, which they've been working on for quite some time. My intention is on the 78 to do the very same thing. And there was a discussion, I think it was Mayor Salas from Chula Vista had brought up,
she had interesting comments, I thought.
Yeah, she brought up that, maybe other cities in North County could secure funds for the 78. San Marcos is the only city in North County at this point in time. We have over $30 million that we require each development in our city to pay into.
Mm-hmm.
So we have already done such a thing. We've been working with Caltrans specifically on the Woodland Parkway interchange improvements.
Mm-hmm.
So SANDAG is not in this equation. It's been us, the city of San Marcos, working directly with Caltrans to work on these improvements because we know that it's part of our responsibility as a city that's off the 78. And if you've never been to San Marcos, we are bisected by the 78.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But, one of the things that I really thought has always been important and part of why I think the 78 does need the HOV improvements is because we have so many businesses that really are needing to use the 78 because they've got to move their goods around. Like, for instance, I use this one an awful lot. Hunter Industries, they're a pretty big manufacturer of sprinkler technology, and they are doing so much for the environment. I am really proud of all the work they're doing over there. But they specifically move about $35 million a month. They need that 78 connection to get them to where they need to go.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're looking at HOV lanes, again, back to the technology that I think it brings forward and allows you to really plan for the future and, the autonomous vehicles and all that, you still need to move your goods around. And so when I thought about what's going to happen with the actual roads and, the promise to the voters from the 2004 vote, I think that for me, I always thought, too, it also is a business decision. How are you going to keep people employed? How are you going to keep your businesses thriving? San Diego has an awful lot of technology and goods that have to be moved. And then look at our port, too. Yeah. And so I felt that's why a balanced approach has always been important to me.
Well, so on the balanced approach, and that was I'll just lay my cards on the table. I had a hard time with this debate because from both the people who supported the SANDAG staff proposal and the people who supported the amendment, I had a hard time identifying with either of the narratives around the differences between those two. So on the idea of a balanced plan, and that was something that was said repeatedly, this is a balanced plan. This is the strikes the right balance between transit and highways, and I gotta say the difference between the staff proposal and the amendment seems to me to be one of degree, not category. And so I don't quite understand why removing $60 million from a freeway project on 5 to freeway projects on the 78 and 57, like that somewhere in that shift we go from unbalanced to balanced.
Well, let me go back to the July vote. Mm-hmm. So in the July vote that we decided to move forward, and we directed staff, SANDAG staff, to prioritize the 52, the 67, the 12594 connector, and then also the 78.
Yeah.
So when we made that vote, and in early August, I met with Hassan, with Mayor Bailey from Coronado, and then Supervisor Desmond. He put forth this plan that he had brought forward to the board, and that was the same one that we just saw, that we just voted on. I said, but this isn't what we voted on. There's no prioritization of what we discussed at that last meeting. And he said, well, this is what I felt that you had directed me to do. And I said, but there's no prioritization. If you're not capturing what we voted on, there's a problem. Well, but let me just say this. You can't do any sort of secure any funding for a highway project if you do not have the environmental done. Yes. And you also need the design. So it's an approach of starting out, getting the ball rolling, doing what we promised to the voters, because the voters don't understand, for the most part. I mean, some people do, but they don't understand that you have to have an environmental, then you have to have design, and then you can move forward with construction. So there's so many moving parts of it. But if you don't start with one part, you have an issue. And so what was brought to us by Director Acrata was not any prioritization of any environmental studies to be done. So when you're not even doing any sort of prioritization because you're not starting the ball rolling on these projects, I think that is a lack of following what the board direction was, and that was the last meeting, I believe, in July.
Yeah, so that July meeting was an interesting one. There was sort of a belabored discussion about getting the motion exactly right, and it ended up being a contentious vote. You know, my takeaway from it was that the language of the motion ended up being vague enough that I think you probably could have made a broad range of arguments about what would satisfy it, such as, you know, in the original staff proposal, there was a I-15-78 express lane connector design for $25 million that, you know, I think you could arguably say falls into the request in that statement to put some money on the 78, and maybe that's what he was getting at. But my question is just that it still seems like what you guys voted on, and I think I want to emphasize, I think this makes it true for other people who thought that this plan was such a betrayal of what the vision had been. I think it works both ways. But what I would say is that the amendment seems very much to me like a tweak, not a rewriting of any sort of big picture direction. And so I don't quite understand how the original, and it's, maybe I'm repeating myself, but they both seem balanced in the same way to me. I mean, it's and on the question of Transnet, well, you know, I-5 North connections were included in Transnet too, and that was taken out of this proposal. I'm sorry. Just investments in I-5 North Coast Corridor project was included in Transnet.
Well, yes, but the only change is the HOV conversion to the
express lanes.
Yes, exactly. So I didn't see that as a huge change. Trust me, I would love to see every single project actually delivered the way that we had originally planned. That's not going to happen. This is a 5-year spending plan that we're discussing that we voted on. And so
yeah, and my understanding is that the I-5 project isn't canceled. It's pushed out to 2035 instead of 2025 now.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So it's really moving things around. It's not it's prioritizing all of the projects that we have discussed in that July meeting and really moving forward with the prioritization. That's how I see it.
Yeah.
And you know, there was this discussion by some board members that possibly we would not be able to reach our greenhouse gas emissions and all of that. And I look around and I think, well, I hope you're doing your part, because I sure am.
Well, I thought you made an interesting point there about people who focus on their own carbon footprint through how they get to work, but maybe don't pay attention to the fact that they order everything through Amazon, which has an extensive vehicle miles traveled component. I think that was a good point. I guess where I push back is the idea that a grand compromise of some kind was struck that changed the direction one way or another at SANDAG. It seemed very much to me like a kind of small course correction from one direction or another. Do you think I'm being flippant about that?
Well, there were some board members that voted no.
Oh,
that were very impassioned.
Let me tell you, I mean this in both directions. I think that there was. I just listened to the entire meeting thinking, this seems like a smaller deal than everybody is making it out to be.
Well, I don't believe that it's a small deal in the fact that we are actually moving forward on the environmentals. Mm-hmm. Now, there will be plenty more to discuss at SANDAG and plenty more compromises that need to happen. And that is, we are going to need to figure out how to secure the funding for all of these projects.
Yes.
Now, I'm up for it because, well, I'm not really a fighter, but I'm very impassioned in getting things done. And that is working across party lines. And, you mentioned earlier that it was a Democrat and a Republican. And I don't really like the partisan politics. And I tell everyone, listen, we're here to work together. We're here to serve the citizens of the county while we're here at SANDAG, and then our respective cities or districts when we are back at our cities and the county. So when I look at all of the fighting that's going on, I don't understand some of it, to be honest, because I'm far more interested in getting things done, like I said.
Well, so yeah, I mean, the revenue questions facing SANDAG beyond this plan are really, frankly, the most important thing that the agency is going to deal with, even after the 5 big moves comes forward, and presuming it gets support of the board, which maybe is a big presumption, but for the sake of conversation, let's stipulate that it does. You still need to find more revenue to start paying for chunks of all those projects. You won't be anywhere near paying for all of it in the present situation. So whether that revenue comes from a new tax measure, or whether it comes from some sort of congestion pricing regime, or whether it comes from a federal stimulus program, or whether it comes from a new state revenue source, those are questions that are simply up in the air right now. I guess the question, and this is something that you've alluded to today and that came up a lot at the board on Friday, is that if you don't have buy-in from all parts of the county and everybody on the board, then any sort of local revenue plan is DOA, and it's simply not going to pass. My question for you, and this is the last one before we got to go, is this $60 million reallocation from this 5-year program budget enough of a show of good faith to alleviate those concerns that you'd have a fractured SANDAG and a fractured county leadership if you were going for a local revenue measure in 2 years or 4 years or whenever that is?
Well, that's a good question, because I believe that remains to be seen. And I don't think that the fight is over. I'm not sure if you're aware, but a board member has sent a letter to the rest of the board trying to take this back. I believe there will be a clawback of some of the board trying to change what our vote was on Friday, to be honest. And I think that it's really important that we're very careful in how we are representing our county. I don't believe that all of the board members are looking at the entire county. And I think that's a shame, because we have East County and North County that really has never gotten the, I think, the appropriate amount of attention for our roads and our transit, to be honest. And I can't really speak to, honestly, what goes on in East County as far as transit. But if you look at North County transit, nothing gets to Orange County except for across North County Rail. We really do. We have a lot of challenges. And that's why working together is so important, and figuring out how to provide both the roads and then the transit, but really transit that makes sense. And I don't want us to go back to a technology that's maybe 10 years, 20 years ago we were doing readily. I really want us to look forward and figure out how to move people around more efficiently. Mm-hmm. Again, with autonomous vehicles. autonomous vehicles drive on a road, right? Until we
they also don't exist. But we gotta.
Hey, mine's semi-autonomous.
Semi doing a lot of work in that sentence.
It's true.
All right. We got to wrap it up there.
Sure.
Mayor Jones, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Congratulations on your victory last week at SANDAG.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Voice of San Diego podcast, the most popular political affairs podcast recorded in downtown San Diego. You can keep up with everything happening at Voice with our newsletters. Find them all at voiceofsandiego.org/newsletters. I'm Scott Lewis, editor-in-chief at Voice. Andrew Keats is assistant editor. Sarah Libby is managing editor. And this show was produced by Nate John, Adriana Heldes, and Megan Wood. We will talk to you next week.